Locks don't apply to family. My mother said it hours after I carried my 5-month-old daughter into the first home that had ever belonged only to us. I was still in my coat, boxes unopened in the dark, my baby asleep on my shoulder, my husband 8 weeks in the ground. "We're coming tomorrow," she said. "Your sister's family needs the space. A big house sitting empty is a waste." She said it gently, the way you'd offer someone a favor. That was what made it hurt. She wasn't asking. She was informing me. I didn't argue. I said goodnight, sank into the rocking chair, and rocked my baby until she settled. The next morning, she came back with cars full of people and reached for my front door. Sure, a lock could never stand between family. She had no idea what my husband had left inside that house, or that the thing my family had mocked me for my whole life was about to cost her everything. Before I tell you what happened when her hand closed over that lock, you need to know how my daughter and I ended up behind it. My name is Joanna. I'm 35. 8 weeks earlier, I had been somebody's wife. Let me take you back to the start. The keys were still warm from my hand when I unlocked that door for the first time. 2 of them, on a plain silver ring the closing agent had handed me across her desk that afternoon. I remember how ordinary they felt. Like nothing. Like everything. I do this for a living, in a way. I run estate sales. When someone dies, or downsizes, or a family finally admits the house has to be emptied, I'm the woman they call. I catalog what's left behind. I price it. I decide what a life was worth in dollars, room by room, and I write it all down by hand because I don't trust myself to a screen. My family had a name for that. Joanna plays with dead people's things. They said it at holidays, and everyone laughed, and I learned to laugh too. The house was small. A brick ranch on a quiet street, with a maple out front and a room at the end of the hall I hadn't opened yet. I'd bought it with the life insurance. That's a sentence I still can't say without my throat closing, so I'll say it fast and move on. Mark's policy paid, and I put a home under my daughter's name with it, and I told myself he would have wanted the maple tree. There were 11 boxes in that end room. I had packed them myself, from his office, the week after the funeral, and I had not been able to open a single one since. His handwriting was on the sides. Block letters, black marker. I'd carried them into the new house and shut the door on them and told myself I'd get to it when I could breathe again. That first night, I didn't turn on many lights. I walked my daughter through the empty rooms in the dark, her weight warm on my shoulder, and I let the streetlight do the work through the bare windows. I want to explain why my mother's phone call landed the way it did. It wasn't the words alone. It was that I had heard some version of them my whole life. In my family, nothing I owned was ever only mine. Once, in my 20s, I saved the better part of a year to buy a used car of my own. The first thing I'd ever bought outright. My mother gave it to Carly within the month. Her commute was longer, mine was just to school, and everyone agreed it was the sensible thing. I took the bus after that and learned not to bring it up. That was the shape of it. Always. What was mine got quietly resorted into what the family needed, and if I said a word, I was the selfish one. My mother, Sharon, handled the money, all of it, for everyone, going back further than I can remember. If you needed something, you went to Sharon, and Sharon decided. My opinions were things to be managed. My quiet was read as agreement. And in Perry, where the prayer chain at First Baptist runs faster than the county paper and the boiled peanut stand off Highway 341 doubles as the town's front porch, a dead man's house sitting dark with a widow inside wasn't grief. It was something the family would be asked to account for by the next potluck. So when the phone lit up with her name, part of me already knew how it would go. I answered because you always answer your mother. She didn't ask about the baby. She didn't ask how I was sleeping, or whether I was eating, or whether the nights were as long as everyone says they are. She told me my sister's family was coming. She told me the house was too much for one person. She said the thing about locks, like it was a kindness, and then she waited for me to agree. In my family, quiet was just the sound of me giving in. I gave her my quiet. I said goodnight. I sat down in the rocking chair Mark had assembled in the last month of his life, and I held my daughter until the shaking in my own hands stopped. But here's the part I kept turning over as I sat there in the dark. My mother had asked me 2 questions on that call. Not about the house. Not really. She'd asked, twice in that soft voice she uses when she wants something, where I had put all of Mark's paperwork. "Where did you put all of Mark's paperwork, honey?" She'd asked it at the start of the call, and she'd asked it again at the end, like she'd forgotten she already had. I looked down the dark hallway at the door I hadn't opened. 11 boxes. His handwriting on all of them. She hadn't called about the space. I didn't know that yet. Not the way I'd know it later. But something in me sat up in the dark and started paying attention. They weren't coming for a house. At 9 the next morning, 2 cars pulled into my driveway, nose to tail, and doors started opening before the engines were off. I watched from the front window with my daughter on my hip. My mother, Sharon, got out of the first car in her good coat, the one she wears to funerals and to church, and to any moment she's decided is important. Behind her came my sister, Carly, and Carly's husband, and 2 kids, and a family friend I hadn't seen in years, and a man I didn't recognize in a work jacket. Carly was carrying a tape measure. 8 weeks after my husband died, my sister came to my house with a tape measure in her hand. I opened the door before my mother could reach it. Not wide, just enough to stand in the gap, the baby warm against my chest, the cold morning air coming past me into the hall. "Joanna," my mother smiled. She has a good smile. We didn't want to keep knocking and wake the baby. "This isn't a good time, Mom." "Nonsense." She was already looking past me, down the hall, cataloging. "I know that look. I invented that look. This place is far too big for the 2 of you. It isn't healthy, rattling around alone. We talked about it." "You talked about it." Carly stepped up beside her, tape measure in her fist, and had the grace to look at the doormat instead of at me. "We just want to see the back bedrooms," she said. "For the kids, not the kids' room." I kept my voice level. "The one at the end of the hall. That's the room you want to see." For a half second, nobody said anything. And in that half second, I watched my mother's eyes flick down the hallway to the closed door and back to me, and I knew I'd guessed right. "Don't be dramatic," Sharon said. The man in the work jacket shifted his weight on my porch. He had a clipboard. My mother saw me see him. "That's just Dale," she said. "He does odd jobs. I asked him to look at the locks, in case you'd lost a key. Family shouldn't be locked out of family, honey. Locks don't apply to us." There it was again, out loud, in daylight, on my own front step. "You called a locksmith," I said. "For my house." "I called a friend." She said it the way she says everything, like the softness made it true. "You're overwhelmed. You're not thinking clearly. Someone has to." I looked at Dale. Dale looked at his clipboard. "Dale," I said, "you can go home. Nobody's changing any locks today." He went, down the steps and into his truck before my mother could stop him. A decent stranger could read this situation faster than my own family could. Carly wouldn't meet my eyes. "Joe," she said quietly, "when can we start clearing out Mark's office? The sooner it's boxed up." "It's already boxed up." I heard my own voice go flat. 11 boxes. In that room. And you're not touching them. My mother's smile didn't move, but something underneath it did. It's just paperwork, Joanna. Bank statements and old files. You don't want to be surrounded by his things. It isn't good for you. She reached out and put her hand on the door frame. Not the door, the frame, a half-inch from my shoulder. Let us help. That's all this is. I looked at her hand on the frame of the house I had bought with the money my husband's death had paid out. You don't have a key, I said, and you won't. I closed the door. Gently. I heard them on the porch for another minute. My mother's voice, low and reasonable, explaining me to the others. Then the cars started, one after another, and backed out, and were gone. I stood in the hall with my daughter and my heart going too fast, and I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt like a woman who had just learned her family had driven across 2 counties with a tape measure and a locksmith for a room full of her dead husband's files. I called the only number I had left that felt like a lifeline, my husband's brother, to ask if any of this made sense to him. It went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I put the baby down for her nap. And then I stood outside that end room for a long time, my hand flat on the door, not opening it. Whatever was in those boxes, my mother wanted it badly enough to lie to my face on my own porch. I wasn't ready to know what it was, but somebody, somewhere, already did. That afternoon, a car I didn't recognize parked at my curb, and a woman I'd never met got out and walked up my drive with a leather folder under her arm. She was maybe 60, in a gray blazer, unhurried. She stopped at the bottom of my steps instead of coming up, the way you do when you want someone to feel safe. Mrs. Whitfield, she said, my name is Diane Ackerley. I'm an attorney. I was your husband's attorney. She paused. I'm sorry to come unannounced. I've been trying to reach you, and given who I saw leaving this morning, I decided I shouldn't wait any longer. I stood in the doorway with the baby monitor in my hand and said nothing. I didn't know I had a husband's attorney. Mark handled a lot quietly. That was his way. He took the weight before you knew there was weight. May I show you something? Diane Ackerley opened the leather folder on the flat of her forearm and turned it so I could see. A letter. Mark's signature at the bottom. I would know that signature at the bottom of the sea. He came to me last winter, she said, about your grandmother's trust. He'd found something in the numbers he didn't like, and he wanted to understand it before he brought it to anyone. And he set things up, a policy, a trust for your daughter, so that if anything ever happened to him, you and the baby would be covered. He didn't tell you because he didn't want you carrying it while he wasn't sure yet. The hallway tilted very slightly, the way a floor does when you stand up too fast. What did he find? I said. It didn't come out as a question. My voice had gone somewhere flat and far away. That, Diane said gently, is what I think you already started to wonder this morning. May I come in? I let her in. I made coffee. I didn't drink. And for the first time in 8 weeks, sitting at my own kitchen table across from a stranger my husband had trusted, I understood that I was not, after all, entirely alone in this. The person who had my back wasn't my mother. It wasn't my sister. It was Mark. Still, from wherever he'd gone. The envelope came 4 days later, and it came the way bad news always seems to, on an ordinary afternoon, from a person in a polo shirt who apologized while handing it over. I opened it standing at the kitchen counter with the baby in the carrier on my chest. Court letterhead. My mother's name, my name, and a phrase I had to read 3 times before it meant anything. An action to impose a constructive trust on the property at my address. I didn't know what a constructive trust was. I knew what the rest of it meant. There was a lawsuit against my house now, with my mother's name on one side and mine on the other, filed in a courthouse where anyone could walk in and read it. That was the part that reached me first. Not the legal words, but the public record. In a town like Perry, a claim against the widow's house, brought by the widow's own mother, wouldn't stay quiet for a day. It would be at the potluck before I understood it myself. I called Diane Ackerley. She was at my table within the hour, reading it with the folder open beside her. "All right," she said. "Here's what she's done." She turned the pages toward me and pointed, one item at a time, so I wouldn't drown. "She's filed a claim that says $150,000 of the money that bought this house was really family money, that it was owed to your grandmother's estate, and that because it went into this house, the family has an interest in the house itself. That's a lie. I know it's a lie." She said it plainly, no drama, which somehow made it easier to hear. But it's a specific kind of lie. A claim about money, on its own, doesn't touch your home. A claim that says your house was bought with that money, that touches the title, and that lets her do this. She slid one more page across. "A lease pendens. It's a public notice that there's a lawsuit against this property. It freezes your title. You can't sell. You can't refinance. Until this is resolved, this house has a cloud over it that everyone can see." I looked at the word freezes. I thought about the maple tree. Can she take the house? Diane didn't soften it into nothing, and I was grateful for that. Not by filing a paper. The notice itself can't force a sale. But there's a hearing. If a judge lets her claim go forward, if she convinces the court there's really family money buried in these walls, then it can become a claim on the house itself. And that road ends with a sale. She let that sit. The hearing is in 22 days. 22 days. My daughter was asleep against my chest, her hand curled around the strap of the carrier. I did the thing I do when a number matters. I wrote it on the inside of my wrist with the pen from the counter, 22, so I couldn't pretend I hadn't heard it. "What do we need?" I said, "to make it stop?" Diane didn't pretend it was simple. 2 things. First, we prove the money that bought this house was never family money, that it came from somewhere clean. Second, we prove what your grandmother's trust was actually worth to begin with, so her reports can be measured against something real. She tapped the table once. She's counting on the fact that no one alive can say what the starting number was. If we can say it, her whole story falls apart. I thought about 11 boxes down the hall, and a man who'd counted things for a living, and a woman who counts them for a living, too. And if we can't? Then it's your word against hers, Diane said, and she's been winning that argument your whole life. There's more you should know, Diane said, because it explains the speed of this. Your sister is being evicted. Carly's behind on everything, and her landlord filed. She has about a month before she's out. She closed the folder. Your mother is moving fast on 2 fronts at once. She needs somewhere to put Carly's family. And she needs something else. Something in this house. The boxes, I said. You've mentioned the boxes twice now. Diane looked at me carefully. You keep circling that room. Have you opened it? I hadn't. I'd stood outside that door a dozen times with my hand flat against it, and I had not been able to turn the knob, because turning the knob meant Mark was really gone, and had left me his unfinished work to carry. No, I said. Joanna. She said my name the way you'd steady someone on a ledge. I've read your grandmother's trust filings. I know what your mother has been reporting to the court for years. And I know your husband spent his last winter building something to answer it. Whatever's in that room is the thing your mother drove across 2 counties to reach before you did. She stood and gathered her folder and set her card on my table. We fight this with the truth. On paper. and the paper is in that room." She left. The house went quiet, the particular quiet of a baby sleeping and a clock ticking. I stood at the end of the hall. 22 days, written on my wrist. A cloud on my house I couldn't see, but everyone else could. And a locked room I'd been too broken to open. That night, after the last feeding, I stood at that door and I put my hand on the knob, and this time I turned it. The room smelled like him. That's the first thing. Paper and a little cedar from the closet, and something underneath that was just Mark. And I stood in the doorway and let it hit me and did not turn on the light for a moment because, in the dark, I could pretend he'd only stepped out. Then I turned on the light, and it was 11 cardboard boxes and a desk I'd taken apart and rebuilt against the wall. And it was work. His work. These weren't keepsakes. I knew that the second I cut the tape on the first box. No photographs, no ticket stubs, no sweaters that still smelled like him. Files, manila folders, labeled in his block print, arranged by year. Bank records, statements, a legal pad covered in his handwriting, columns of figures with arrows and question marks, and at the top of the first page, underlined twice, Grandma's Trust. Where did it go? I sat down on the floor of that room in the middle of the night, and I read my husband's last project by the light of one lamp. He had been careful. Mark was always careful. He'd started, as far as I could tell, the winter before, when the trust my grandmother left should finally have been paying out to the grandchildren, and mine hadn't come. He'd asked quietly, the way he asked everything, and the answer he'd gotten from my mother, the trustee, the one who handled all of it, hadn't added up. So he'd started pulling records, and he'd built, page by page, a picture. Further into the files, I found the thing he'd built it around. A certified accounting, one of my mother's official reports to the court, with Mark's sticky notes fanned along the margin in his small, patient hand. He'd circled a line near the bottom, the one that said the trust had paid out most of its balance in administrative distributions, and beside it he'd written a single question. To whom? He'd drawn an arrow off the edge of the page to a bank statement clipped behind it, where the very same amount to the dollar had landed in an account that wasn't the trust's. He'd found the seam. He just hadn't lived long enough to pull the whole thread. In the second box, tucked inside a folder, I found an envelope with my name on it in his handwriting. I want to slow down here, because this is the part I go back to. I opened it at 2 a.m. on the floor of that room, and inside was a single sheet, and on it, in the careful block letters he used when he wanted to be sure I could read it, he had written, "Joe, if you're reading this, then I didn't get to finish, and I'm sorry. Look at Grandma's numbers. You'll see it faster than anyone alive, because you're the only one who ever wrote down what things were really worth. It's all here. Don't let them tell you that you don't understand money. You understand it better than any of them. Finish it for me. M." I read it once. I read it again. And then I pressed the paper flat against my mouth, and I did not make a sound, because down the hall my daughter was sleeping, and I had learned in 8 weeks how to come apart without waking her. When I could see again, I kept reading, and this is where the whole shape of it changed. Because it was never about the house. The thing my mother wanted from this room wasn't space, and it wasn't closure, and it wasn't my dead husband's old bank statements for sentimental reasons. Mark had found that my grandmother's trust, the money she'd left to be passed down to her grandchildren, the money my mother had been in sole control of for years, was gone. Most of it. Drained slowly, year after year, dressed up in the reports as distributions and administrative costs, while my mother certified to a court that everything was in order. He'd caught it. He'd started to prove it, and then he'd died, with the work half finished, in 11 boxes, in a room. My mother didn't need my house. She needed this room to disappear before anyone opened it. We need the space was the story. Locks don't apply to family was the key she wanted. And the thing behind the locked door was the only thing on earth that could sink her. And the worst part was how ordinary the lie had been. For years, whenever anyone asked about my grandmother's trust, the money she'd meant for all of us, the answer came in my mother's gentlest voice. There's hardly anything left, dear. These things dwindle. Managing an estate is expensive. I'd believed it. We all had. I'd stopped expecting a cent of my own inheritance long ago, and I'd felt guilty for ever having wondered about it. The whole time, the money hadn't dwindled. It had been carried out the back door a little at a time, while the woman carrying it stood in front of the family and grieved the cost of managing things. I sat very still on that floor for a long time. I was not thinking about being sad. I'll be honest about that. Somewhere in that night, between the second box and the third, the grief in me cooled into something with an edge to it, and it has never entirely gone back. I looked at his legal pad. Where did it go? I looked at his note. Finish it for me. I reached up to the desk, found a pen, and under his last line of figures, I wrote one word, and closed the pad, and stood up. Okay, I said, to the empty room, to him. I'm going to finish it. But even as I said it, I knew I was missing a piece. Mark had proven money had left the trust. He hadn't been able to prove how much should have been there in the first place. And without that number, the true one, the honest one, it was still his word, from the grave, against my mother's word, in a courtroom. I needed to know what my grandmother's estate had actually been worth on the day she stopped being able to protect it herself. And then, standing in that room at 3 a.m, I remembered exactly who had counted it. I found the notebook in the bottom of my own toolbox in the garage, under the tape guns and the price stickers, right where a working tool lives. Cloth cover, soft at the corners, the spine cracked from being opened on 1,000 kitchen tables. My inventory book, and in it, in my own handwriting, in ink that had gone a little brown at the edges, the winter I cataloged my grandmother's house, because I'd done it. Years ago, when she could no longer manage on her own and the family home had to be sorted, they'd called me. Of course they'd called me. It was the one thing I was good for. Joanna plays with dead people's things. I had walked through my grandmother's house room by room, and I had written down every item of worth and what it would bring, and I had appraised it honestly, because that is the only way I know how to do it. I made the original inventory, in her own house, with my own hands. That book was the thing Mark couldn't build from bank records. It was the true value of what my grandmother had, the real number, set down the day it still existed, by the one person in the family nobody had thought to worry about. I called Diane Ackerley at 7 the next morning. She was at my table by 9 with 2 coffees, and I put the cloth notebook down between us next to Mark's legal pad, and I watched her go very quiet as she understood what she was looking at. This is the baseline, she said finally. This is the thing that turns his suspicion into a case. He could show money leaving. You can show what was supposed to be there. She looked up at me. Joanna, do you understand what you're holding? Your mother has spent years reporting numbers to a court, counting on the fact that no one could ever say what the starting number really was. And the woman who wrote down the starting number is her own daughter. We worked at that table for 3 days. I'm not going to pretend it was fast or clean. It was long, and it was tedious, and my daughter needed feeding every few hours, and twice I lost the thread and had to start a column over. My daughter learned to sleep in the carrier on my chest while I worked, and I learned to write with one hand. The number on my wrist faded to a gray smudge, and I redrew it darker every morning. But piece by piece, We built it. 3 layers, laid one on top of the other. First layer, my inventory. What my grandmother's estate was actually worth. A little over $310,000 in property and cash, and the things I'd appraised in her own living room. Second layer, my mother's reports to the court. What she'd been certifying year after year as the trust wound down to almost nothing. Her filings showed the trust holding just $42,000. Everything else on paper spent on distributions, on fees, on the ordinary sounding costs that don't invite a second look. Third layer, the bank records Mark had pulled, where the money actually went. The hardest part wasn't the missing money. It was how well it was dressed. My mother hadn't written down anything as plain as theft. She'd written distribution to beneficiaries. The kind of line a tired judge skims past 100 times a year. On paper, it looked like all of us had been paid our fair shares. But when I set those reported distributions against the bank records, the money hadn't split among the grandchildren at all. Every one of them had landed in the same 2 places: my sister's creditors, or an account in my mother's name. The word said family. The account numbers said otherwise. Once I saw the trick, it was on every page, and when we set the 3 side by side, the hole in the middle had a shape, and the shape had a number. $268,000, gone from where it should have been, and the bank records didn't show it vanishing into thin air. They showed it moving into years of my sister's debts, the credit cards and the car and the back rent, over and over, a hole that never filled, and into accounts that were my mother's own. I sat back from the table when we finished, and I looked at the 3 documents lined up, and I felt the room go quiet in that way it does when something is finally true. My grandmother left that money for her grandchildren. She left it so that we'd be looked after when she couldn't do the looking after anymore. There was almost nothing left, and every dollar of it had gone to keep my sister afloat and my mother comfortable, while I got laughed at over the holidays for the very skill that was now about to bring the whole thing down. Diane closed her folder. "It matches," she said. "Line by line. Your book, her filings, the bank." She let out a breath. "I've been doing this a long time. I don't often get to hold a thing this clean. So here's where I have to stop and ask you something, because in a few days I had to decide, and I still wonder what you would have done. I had it. All of it. The proof my grandmother's money had been stolen, and by whom, and the hearing about my house was coming. I could walk into that family, my mother, my sister, all of them, and lay it on the table and end it in a living room. Or I could keep it shut, say nothing, let my mother keep believing I was the overwhelmed widow rattling around a house too big for her, and save every card for the one room where it would actually count. If it were you, would you confront your family with what you'd found, or would you keep the door locked and let the receipts do the talking? Tell me in the comments. Comment locked if you'd have kept it shut until the hearing. I made my choice. But before I could act on it, my mother made a move I hadn't planned for. She stopped waiting for me to open the door. I'd taken the baby to a checkup, and we came home early because she'd fussed through the waiting room and there was no point sitting there. That's the only reason I saw it. 2 men in work clothes were at the side of my house, at the door that lets into the hallway near that end room, and one of them had a tool in the gap of the frame, and the door was giving. I don't remember parking. There's a gap there, a piece of time that's just gone. The next thing I have is standing on my own side lawn with my daughter in my arms, and my voice coming out of me low and hard. Step away from that door. They turned. One of them held up a hand, the easy way you calm a stranger. "Ma'am, we were told the family needs this room cleared. We were told it's authorized. By who? He glanced past me, toward the street, and I followed the look. There was a car parked 3 houses down, engine running, and in the driver's seat, not close enough to be part of it and not far enough to be uninvolved, was my mother. She didn't get out. She watched me see her, and she didn't get out of the car. I understood something then, standing on that lawn with my heart slamming. My mother thought the danger had died with Mark. She thought all she had to do was get his files out of that room before the one she'd never once considered a threat, thought to look inside. She had no idea I'd already looked. She had no idea what was sitting in a cloth notebook in my kitchen. "You need to leave," I said to the men. "Right now. We don't want any trouble." The second one was already stepping back. "We were just told—" "You were told wrong." A screen door banged, and then there was an old man crossing the grass between my house and the next one, moving faster than his age said he should, a coffee mug still in one hand. Walt Hodges is 71 and has lived next to that house longer than I've been alive, and I had spoken maybe 20 words to him in the weeks since I'd moved in. He walked straight past me and planted himself between the 2 men and my side door like a fence post going into the ground. "She's not opening that door," Walt said, "and neither are you." Nobody moved. "I've seen that car before." Walt didn't raise his voice. He nodded down the street, toward my mother, without taking his eyes off the men. "Parked right there. Twice this week. I'll say so too, if anybody official ever wants to ask me." He took a slow sip of his coffee. "Now, you boys want to be somewhere else." They wanted to be somewhere else. They packed their tool and they went, not quite running, and down the street, an engine turned over and my mother's car pulled away from the curb and was gone. I stood on the lawn and started to shake, now that it was over, the way you do. Walt looked at me and looked at the baby, and his face did something kind that I wasn't ready for. "You're Mark's wife," he said. It wasn't a question. I knew Mark a little, from around town. Good man. I opened my mouth to thank him and found I couldn't get the words out, so I just nodded and had to look at the maple tree for a second until my throat came back. That was the closest I came to breaking all week, and it wasn't the lawsuit that did it. It was a stranger being kind about Mark. Diane came that evening. When I told her, she didn't get angry the way I expected. She got focused. "He assumed the danger was Mark," she said, echoing the thing I'd felt on the lawn. "He's gone, so in her mind the problem is gone, as long as the paperwork disappears." She set 2 things on my table. "But it isn't just you anymore, and it isn't just his files." She tapped the first document. "Because her claim rests on your grandmother's trust money, I've asked the court to make her prove it, to produce a full formal accounting of that trust. And a judge has appointed a neutral auditor to review it." "A what?" "An independent auditor, court appointed. Not my expert, not her lawyer. A third party whose only job is to read the numbers." Diane looked at me. For the first time, this isn't the grieving widow's word against the family matriarchs. Someone with no stake is going to open the books. She let the smallest smile show. And the books she's about to be forced to hand over are the same books that hang her. She slid the second paper toward me. "You won't be the only one reading these numbers now," she said. 9 days to the hearing, and the walls, for the first time, were starting to lean the other way. My uncle came to my door on a Tuesday, and he was carrying a banker's box, and his hands were not steady. Ross Cole is my mother's younger brother. He's a soft-spoken man who spent his whole life doing what his big sister told him, and I had not expected him, and I certainly had not expected the box. He stood on my porch, the same porch, and he couldn't quite look at me. "Can I come in, Joe? I need to give you something before I lose my nerve." I let him in. He set the box on my kitchen table and opened the flaps, and I saw folders, years of them, and I saw my mother's trust accountings, the same reports Diane and I had been fighting to pry loose, and on the signature line of every single one was my uncle's name. "I'm a co-trustee," Ross said. He sat down heavily. "Was, on paper. Your grandmother named us both, Sharon and me, because that's what you do. You name too." He pressed his palm flat on the top folder like he could hold it down. "She'd put them in front of me once a year. Said, 'Sign here, Ross. It's just a formality.' And I signed. 6 years of these. I never read a single one." His voice cracked on the last word, and he stopped and gathered himself. "I trusted her. She's my sister. You trust your sister." I sat across from him. "Why now, Ross?" "Because a lawyer called me about a formal accounting, and I got scared, and I did the thing I should have done 6 years ago." He looked at me finally, and his eyes were wet and steady. I read them, and then I pulled the bank statements, and I know what I signed my name to. He pushed the whole box an inch toward me. "I'll say all of it, wherever you need me to." I signed it. I never read it. She handled everything, and nobody was allowed to ask. He slid one report out of the stack and turned it toward me. "This is the one that got me. The year we sold your grandmother's house." He put his finger on a figure near the top. "It says here, that's all the estate was worth. All of it." His hand was shaking again. "Joe, I stood in that house. You walked me through it. That number's a lie you could see from the road." I looked at what my mother had certified the estate was worth, and I thought about my cloth notebook in the garage, and I understood that Ross had just handed me the same crime from the other side. I put my hand on the box. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't. But I said thank you, and I meant it, because it costs a man something to walk into the house of the niece his silence helped rob. The harder conversation was the one after. Carly came 2 days later. I asked her to. I decided that whatever happened in that courtroom, my sister was going to hear it from me first, in my kitchen, and not from a judge. I laid it out on the table the way Diane and I had built it. My inventory, my mother's filings, the bank records, and then the ledger of where the money had actually gone. And I let Carly follow the line with her own finger, down through years of her own debts, the credit cards, the car, the back rent that had come current again and again as if by magic, all of it paid out of the money our grandmother had left for both of us. Carly went white. She sat back. "That's not—" She stopped. "Mom helped me. That was Mom's money. She helped me because I was drowning." "It wasn't Mom's money, Carly. She said—" My sister's voice broke off, and I watched something come apart behind her eyes, the same thing that had come apart behind mine on the floor of that room. She told me not to ask. Every time, she'd say, "Don't worry about where it comes from. That's my job. Just let me handle it." Carly put her hand over her mouth. She told me not to ask, and I didn't ask. She didn't defend our mother after that. She didn't become my ally either. Not really. She didn't stand up and swear she'd testify. She didn't hug me. She didn't say sorry in a way that fixed anything. She just stopped. She pulled her hands back off that table like the paper had burned her, and she stood, and she said she had to go, and she left. But she pulled out of it. Whatever my mother had planned to use my sister for, my sister wouldn't be holding the other end of it anymore. That night, Diane called with the last piece, and it came from the plainest place of all. "I traced the purchase," she said. "Every dollar that bought your house. It came from one place, the life insurance, into the trust for your daughter, into the title. There is no family money in these walls. Not a cent. The bank record proves the down payment and the purchase were paid, in full, from the policy. She paused, which means her whole claim, the $150,000 of family money in your house, is built on air. And the only person who moved family money in this story is the one who filed the lawsuit. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone. My inventory, my mother's filings, the bank trail, Ross's box, Carly gone quiet, and now the clean line proving the insurance had bought this house and nothing else had. So we have it, I said. We have all of it. 3 days to the hearing. And here's the truth I have to tell you, because it's what changed how I walked into that room. By then, I already knew how this ended. I wasn't afraid of losing anymore. The only thing I didn't know, the only thing left to find out, was that my mother was going to hand me the last piece herself, out loud, in front of everyone who mattered to her. The hearing was in a plain room with fluorescent lights and rows of wooden chairs, and it was open, and the family came. They came because they were beneficiaries of my grandmother's trust, and they had every right to be there, and because my mother had told them to, and because in my family you show up when Sharon says show up. My sister Carly in the back, aunts, the family friend from the porch, my Uncle Ross near the front with his hands folded, and at a side table, with a stack of tabbed folders and no expression at all, the court-appointed auditor. My mother had done this. She'd filed the claim that dragged us all here, so there was no ambush she could cry about. She'd built the room herself. She went first, because it was her claim. She stood, in the good coat, and she was very good. She told the room that she had cared for this family's money her whole life, that the trust had simply run its course. Distributions, taxes, the cost of managing things, until what remained was $42,000, and that was nobody's fault. That was just what was left. And then she turned, and she looked at me, and her voice caught in exactly the right place. "I've given everything to this family," she said, "and my own daughter, grieving, I know she's grieving, took family money, put it into a house, and now she's turned my grandson's inheritance into an attack on me." She let a tear fall. She's always been able to do that. Diane stood. She didn't raise her voice. "Your Honor, we'd like to establish what the trust was actually worth at the start." She opened the cloth notebook. "This is a contemporaneous inventory and appraisal of the decedent's estate," Diane said, written by hand, at the time, by the person the family hired to do it. She set it on the table where the auditor could see. A little over $310,000. The auditor leaned in and began to read. My mother didn't blink. "That's an amateur's guess. Joanna sells other people's junk. She's not a qualified—" "She made the only record that exists," Diane said, "of what was in that house. Made it years ago. And the numbers in it are about to match 3 other things." She laid down the second stack. My mother's own filings. Then the third. The bank records. And then she asked my uncle to stand. Ross Cole stood up, and his voice shook, and he said the thing he'd come to say. "I'm the co-trustee. I signed these accountings. 6 years of them." He swallowed. "I never read a single one." She handed me a pen. I trusted her. The room made a sound then. Not words, just the sound a room makes when a floor gives way somewhere underneath it. An aunt in the second row put a hand over her mouth. The family friend who'd come to my porch with the others looked at the floor. In the back, Carly had gone very still. My mother's chin came up. "Ross doesn't understand the paperwork. He never did. I handled it because none of them could. $310,000 at the start," Diane said quietly. $42,000 reported at the end, and the bank shows where the difference went. She turned one page toward the auditor. $268,000. Into the debts of one grandchild. And into the trustee's own accounts. Diane laid down one more page. And the claim that family money bought this house? She set a bank record beside it. Every dollar came from one place, a life insurance policy, into a trust for a 5-month-old child, into the title. She looked at the auditor. There is no family money in those walls. There never was. The only person in this room who moved family money is the one who filed this lawsuit. And then Diane placed the last thing on the table, Mark's note. My husband's handwriting, on a single sheet. I'd asked her to read it, because I couldn't have gotten through it, and she read it slowly, the way you'd handle something that had come a long way to be there. Joe, if you're reading this, then I didn't get to finish, and I'm sorry. Look at Grandma's numbers. You'll see it faster than anyone alive, because you're the only one who ever wrote down what things were really worth. The room was very quiet. My mother should have stopped. Any honest person would have had nothing left to say. But she couldn't stand the silence, and she couldn't stand losing in front of the people whose opinion was the air she breathed, and so she did the thing that finished her. That's not the number, she snapped. It was never 310. After the second quarter loss, it was 284. I moved it myself. I know exactly what was in that account. She stopped, but it was already out. In a room full of witnesses, my mother had just corrected a figure that only the person moving the money would ever have known. The auditor's pen had stopped. Then it moved again, slow, making a note in the margin, the way you mark a page you mean to come back to. Ross was staring at his sister. He'd signed his name under hers for 6 years, and now he looked at her like a stranger. And I watched my mother realize, in real time, that she had just told a room full of people she'd kept the books in her own head the whole time. She looked at me, and for the first time in my life, my mother had nothing to say to me at all. Her tears came again, the reliable ones, the ones that had gotten her out of everything for 66 years. This time the room watched them fall, and nothing happened. No one moved to comfort her. Not Ross, not the aunts, not the friend who'd driven across 2 counties to help her empty my house. The auditor made a note. The tears just ran down and dried, and when she saw they weren't working, the softness dropped off her face, and she turned on the one person in the room she'd always been able to move. Carly, she said, Carly, tell them. Tell them I did it for you. Carly stood up in the back of the room. She looked at our mother for a long moment. Then she picked up her purse, and she walked out, and the door closed behind her. I stood up. I had one thing to say, and I'd known for 3 days I was going to say it, and I said it to her the way you say a thing you mean. I didn't call her Mom. Sharon. Her head came up at her own name in my mouth. She has never, in 35 years, heard me call her that. You don't get to decide what's mine. Not the house. Not her memory. Not anymore. I didn't shout it. I didn't cry it. I set it down between us like the last item in an inventory, priced and final, and I sat back down. The auditor closed the folder. The ruling didn't come with a gavel and a speech. It came the way real things come, in plain language, on paper, over the next 2 days. The claim against my house was dismissed. There was no family money in my walls, and once the auditor's report went in, no one pretended otherwise. The L.I.'s pendants was ordered discharged. The cloud came off my title. I could have sold the house that afternoon if I'd wanted to. I didn't. I just wanted to be able to. And then the rest of it moved. The way a thing moves once a neutral party finally counts. My mother, Sharon, was removed as trustee. The court found she'd breached her duty, and it ordered her to repay what was gone, $268,000, back into the trust for the grandchildren it had been left to. What she couldn't repay would follow her, and because the numbers involved forged certainties and money moved for years under sworn reports, the matter was referred for criminal review. A detective left a card in my door a week later. I sat at the same kitchen table where Diane and I had built the case, and I gave a statement, and I handed over copies of all of it, my inventory, Mark's files, the bank records. The detective took notes and said these things take time. They do. That part is still going. I don't control it, and I've made my peace with not controlling it. The neutral party did what the family never would. It counted. The rest wasn't the court's doing. It was just what happens when the truth stops being something one person gets to hold. Ross withdrew every authority he'd ever signed over to his sister and hasn't spoken to her since. The aunt stopped calling her. The family friend from my porch sent me a card, of all things, that I still don't know how to feel about. And the town heard. Of course it heard. In Perry, the story didn't need me to tell it. The prayer chain that had carried my dark house to the whole county carried this too. My mother had run the women's circle at First Baptist for as long as I'd been alive. Before long, someone else was running it. She stopped being asked to organize the potluck. She stopped being the woman people called when a thing needed handling. The authority she'd spent 66 years building, the whole reason the softness in her voice had ever worked.